Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya
Assalamu alaikum.
Rahman.
Peace be upon you. I'm going to start in the way we traditionally do within the Islamic framework, and that is by actually in the name of God. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulih al-Kareem amma ba'd. So all praise and glorification is due to God, and we send our peace and our blessings upon his final messenger, the Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him. So as I was pondering about what to address tonight, much like John, I was actually here last year. I got the chance to go to Christ Church, visit with some of the people, and I remember one specific individual we had visited. And he was in the hospital, but he wasn't in the hospital for a physical injury. He was in the hospital because he was having trouble dealing with the loss that he had. You see, on that day, he had lost his son. And I remember we had visited him, and his wife was there as well. And we visited him. He was very happy to see us. And his wife was there, and his wife was very quiet. And you naturally expect that. But what she had told us was, it almost shook me to the core. Because what she said is that, look, in my son's school, he was in high school, they didn't hold the Friday prayers. So one of the things that we do within Islam or as Muslims is every Friday we go to the mosque and we pray. We have a Friday congregation. And she says that my son didn't have that in his school, so I would pick him up, and he told me, he said, Mom, I don't have this in my school. Can you pick me up from school and take me to the mosque every Friday? And she would take him every Friday to go and pray and attend the sermon and all of that. And as she was sitting there quietly, she said, that Friday, I dropped my son off to his death. This was the last time she saw him. And it was heart-wrenching. And as I started thinking about that, we met with his young man's father as well. As he was leaving, he asked one of the people that was with us, he goes, do you have any kids? He was asking all of us. And I said, yes, I have kids. I said, I have 5 kids. And after his initial shock, he asked another brother, and he said, I have 2 kids. And he said, do you have any sons? One of the guys said, yes, I do. So he came to him, and I remember this vividly. He came to him, embraced him, and said, the most important thing in your life right now is to be with your son. So the thing, when I was reflecting upon this, I wanted to expound upon something that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about. And what I mean is, we don't necessarily talk about this experience of death per se. A lot of times we consider it uncouth. We consider it something that we shouldn't really speak about. And sometimes it's an event that happens that shakes us to our core, where we start to then really ponder upon certain things. Certain things like our own mortality. I mean, one of the most beautiful things that I saw was the immense outpouring of love that when we were at the mosque, they had opened their doors, that it felt like all of New Zealand was there. And I started pondering upon people that were coming into the mosque. Just to give you an idea, the carpets had been taken out. The walls had been whitewashed. And you had people coming in that were in tears. And I don't mean necessarily Muslims. Yeah, we had Muslims that were coming in. But the majority of people were not from the Islamic faith. But yet, they were able to bind, and they were able to come together as human beings because they understood that there was a loss. That people had experienced something that many of us don't like to think about, and that is death. And as I'm saying it, maybe you consider it a bit uncouth. I'm from Texas, so I'm going to take the liberty and go ahead and say it, right? What's that? We're not going to hold that against me? All right, that's good. I'm leaving in a little bit too, so if you did, I'd be okay. But what I wanted to really, for us to reflect upon the very concept of death. John was mentioning us knowing each other. And one of the things that we find in the Quran, that John had mentioned is what we believe is Revelation, is a verse where God says that, we have made you from a single soul, from a single man, a single female, referring to Adam and Eve. And we have made you into tribes and nations, and the word that's used in Arabic is لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you may know one another. But the thing is, it's I don't want us to limit our knowledge of each other to like, hey, what do you believe? Okay, I believe in the 5 pillars. Or how are your kids? And all of that is good. But what I'm going to say today, and it might be a bit controversial, is that you necessarily don't know about Muslims until you know about their view on the nature of this world and about death. And I'm saying that in just all sincerity, all right? I'll give you a kind of a personal incident or anecdote that happened to me. I was in New York City. It was Halloween. And it was Halloween, and we were out, as part of AIRA, we go out, we try to, clear up misconceptions about Islam. And we were there, and I remember I was having this conversation, and the gentleman I was speaking to was Latino. So as you can tell, I'm brown. He was also brown. And we're having this conversation, and he was like, look, man, it's just, my life is, I'm just worried about the here and the now. And I said, look, why don't you take a copy of the Quran and, just read it. I'm not asking you to believe or anything like that. I wasn't telling him to, put his hand up or whatever and repeat after me or whatever. It just, what does it cost to just read it, man? And we were having this conversation, and I felt he was being a bit stubborn, a bit obstinate, right? Like, it's just, I'm about me, I'm about my life, I'm about partying it up. I don't have time for this. And as I'm speaking to him, this guy shows up behind me. Now, he was Caucasian, he was white, and he was massive. I mean, he was, like, John's tall, right? He was taller than John, all right? Like when I say, and just to kind of give you some background, I'm not that tall. Okay, I'm about 5'4". So when I say he was taller than John, to me, from my perspective, he was even more gigantic, all right? He was like this broad, and he comes up, and he says, hey, man. And I turned around, and I'm speaking to this gentleman, and he says, hey, man, a little while ago, I was in Iraq. And he says, and I killed a whole bunch of you. And I'm thinking now, I got my gun in my car, and I don't see any reason why I shouldn't just kill you. Now, people talk about being brave. Yeah, that's not true. Okay, I mean, that just is not, when you see your life in front of you, all that whole, like, we're going to be brave, it's out the window. Because I was like, literally, I felt for a second I'm facing death now, right? We say, Alhamdulillah, praise be to God. Eventually, the NYPD showed up, right? And if you're from the States, that's a statement you don't hear very often where, thank God the NYPD showed up, right? Anyhow, you'll get that if you understand the dynamics of, whatever, right? Especially if you're two brown people speaking. Anyhow, so what I realized though, as they kind of dealt with him and they took him away, I turned around and I looked at that individual that I was speaking to. And he was really shaken. I mean, I was shaken, but he was really shaken. And he said to me, you know what, I think I'll take a copy of that Quran now. Right? But what I'm trying to highlight, and what I wanted to expound upon, just to give you some idea, what is the view when it comes to our mortality from an Islamic viewpoint? That what do we believe as Muslims? One of the first things we understand that life is, you have a limited time here. And in fact, I'm not going to say that Muslims believe this. If there's anything that humanity can agree upon, and we agree upon very little, right? If if anyone married here, right? So if you're married and you ever want to go out to dinner, they say in Arabic, khalas, you're not going to get dinner because you can never, at least in my household, you can never agree on what to eat. And by the time you actually agree, or one of you capitulates is usually what happens, restaurants are all closed. Anyway, so agreement is very difficult. But one thing I think all of us can agree, whatever your faith background is that we're not here forever. We're going to pass away. And the reality is that maybe as a certain faith or a background, or maybe we haven't thought about it, but it's something we should think about. Because it's going to come. It's like, you talk about like retirement planning, and in the States, we usually criticize people who don't plan for retirement because, if you don't have a nest egg, then, that just shows how, as a millennial, you are so incapable of understanding that you need funds and blah, 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 blah. We get out that whole lecture, whatever it might be, all right? The millennials, anyone here would understand if you know what I'm talking about. But that's a reality that, so if we're understanding there's a reality of retirement, there's a reality to the end. As they say in Avengers language, it's the end game. All right, clearly nobody's a Marvel fan here, but that's okay. Anyway, maybe you're all DC fans. Okay, we'll forgive you for that. So the thing is, we're not going to be here forever. So what is the Islamic view on why are we here? To make it, and the thing is, the Islamic view is very simple. We were not created for nothing. We weren't created for no purpose. We were created, and as the Quran is very clear and unequivocal on this, as it says in the Arabic says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. We have not created all of you except to worship God. But sometimes when we think about worship, we think about like going to the church or the synagogue or the mosque and doing, some sort of specific rituals there, and that's worship. But from an Islamic framework, that's not worship. What worship is, and if you want to get some advanced level Islam here, impress some of your friends, you can ask them, hey man, and you can ask some of your Muslim friends this too. Hey man, what is worship? What do you mean? Like, I know the purpose of your life is to worship God. What do you mean by worship? And you get a whole bunch of different answers, right? And you'd be like, let me tell you what's up, all right? Worship is two basic things. It is the highest level of love for God coupled with the highest level of submission to God. So when we say the highest level of love, we mean that because of who God is, that we understand that He created us, He put us here, He's responsible for our every breath, the fact that we can eat food and digest it, the fact that you can see me and I can see you and everything, that He has that right to be loved. And so we should love God. But not only that, but that He should also be submitted to, that He has that obedience. Because He has the entirety of knowledge, and as human beings, our knowledge is limited. In fact, the very incidence of racism and what we saw at Christchurch, I say, is due to the fact that humans don't have all the knowledge. We prejudge because we don't have all the facts. And sometimes that prejudgment ends up in some tragedies, right? It's known as prejudice, right? To prejudge, because we don't have all the facts. And so therefore, the one that's due our worship, in other words, the highest level of love because of who God is, and the highest level of submission because He knows and we don't. He has the picture and we have just the pixels. That submission is due to God. That's what worship is. And that's what we were created for from the Islamic standpoint. Very clear. But now, beyond that, if that is why we're here, we understand that this place is a temporary place. The nature of the place that we're at is something that's, as they say, going, gone. It's ephemeral. We're not going to be here forever. And so the viewpoint of a Muslim that they're not going to be here forever. In fact, there's a very clear narration from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he tells us, "Kun fi dunya ka'annaka gharib or abir as-sabil." Be in this world as if you're a traveler, or as if you're a stranger, or as if you're a traveler, because you're not going to be here forever. The nature of this world is such that sometimes you're going to have things that are going great. Your life's going to be great. And sometimes you're going to be going through a lot of issues, a lot of struggles, financial struggles, familial struggles, issues with your spouse, issues with your children. How many people have no issues with their kids? Raise your hand. Exactly, thank you. I have 5 kids. Trust me, I know. Okay? Trust me. So with all of that, we understand that the nature of this world, we're not in paradise. We're not in pure bliss. That there's a reason that we're here, and the nature of this world is such that it's going, gone. Now, where's Feroz? How much time do I got left? 2 minutes? Let me leave you with something that I think is very powerful. And I'm going to end on this note in terms of the nature of this world from the Islamic framework. And it's a narration that, I've kind of taken from a scholar by the name of Imam al-Ghazali. So the veracity of the narration isn't 100%, but I think the lessons we can derive from it are very powerful. And I'm going to end on that. It's actually related to the Prophet Jesus. So from the Islamic point of view, we believe all the prophets came with the message of worship God alone. So the prophet Jesus, according to this narration, one day was out with his, you can say, disciples. And they're out and they've been traveling for some time. And he tells one of his disciples, and everyone's hungry, they're famished. So he tells them, go to the market and get some bread. So this man, he goes to the marketplace, he gets some bread. Now he's hungry. So when he takes the money and buys the bread, he gets 3 loaves of bread. And he's like, 3 loaves of bread divided by 12, I'm not eating much. So he eats one of the loaves. And he goes back to Jesus. And Jesus, according to this narration, looks at the bread, looks at him and said, who ate the 3rd loaf? So the man says, I don't know what you're talking about. What 3rd loaf, right? So Jesus says, all right. So they go on their journey, and they come across a gazelle. They hunt it down, and as they're cooking this gazelle, Jesus says, in the name of God, Bismillah, in the name of God, the gazelle comes back to life and runs off. And Jesus then points at that gazelle as it's running away and says, in the name of the One, in the name of God, who caused that gazelle to come to life, I ask you, who ate the 3rd loaf? So the man says, I don't know what you're talking about. No idea what you're talking about. Okay. Frankly, if you really saw that, you'd probably be like, look, okay, it was me. But anyways, he was obstinate, all right? So they keep on going, and they come across a body of water. Jesus says, give me your hands. Some of you might be familiar with this. He says, Bismillah, in the name of God. They walk across the water. And the man, he turns to the man again. He says, in the name of the One who allowed us to do this. In other words, in the name of God, who ate the 3rd loaf? Again, the man says, I don't know what you're talking about. So they continue on their journey. They come to a certain place, and they have like these, there's like a lot of sand, a lot of dirt, and they make 3 piles. And Jesus says, Bismillah, in the name of God. And these 3 piles of sand become 3 large piles of gold. And so Jesus says, look, there's 1 pile for us, 1 pile, or 1 pile for me, 1 pile for you, and 1 pile for the man who ate the 3rd loaf. So he looks at the man, the guy says, it was me, I ate the 3rd loaf, right? I ate it. So Jesus says, you can have all 3 piles of gold, but you can't join us on the journey. So they continue. Now there he is, in the middle of this desert, you can say, 3 piles of gold, and he's elated. He's thinking about everything he's going to spend his money on. He's going to buy this and buy that. In the distance, these 3 robbers show up. They see this guy, and I want you to imagine the scene. They see this guy, the middle of the desert, 3 piles of gold, and they're like, you know what? That gold is ours, right? They jump him, finish him off, and now they're sitting there. And one of them says, look, I think we're kind of hungry. Let's get something to eat. And they say, okay, why don't you go into the town? The 2 of us will guard the gold. You go into town, get us some food. So the man goes into town, and he starts thinking on the way. He's like, why should I split the gold with those 2 fools? Right? I mean, I could just finish them off. So when he gets the food, he poisons the food. And then he heads back. Now, in the meantime, while he's gone, they're like, why should we split it 3 ways when we can split it 2 ways? So when he comes back, you know what we got to do. So he comes back, boom, they finish him off. And they sit down, they say, man, we're hungry. And they eat the food. So now, in the meantime, Jesus comes back with his companions. And what does he see? 3 large piles of gold and 4 dead bodies. And Jesus says to his companions, he says, the reality of this temporary world is what you see in front of you. Everyone is just chasing for more and more and more, and in the reality, we're all just going to pass away. So if the very least you could do when you leave tonight is for you to reflect yourself on your own, why am I here, and what is the reality? Because each and every single one of us is going to meet that inevitable end. So I wanted to thank the organizers and all of you for coming tonight. And I got to say, I love the people in New Zealand. I mean, we had a number of incidents in the U.S., and we didn't see the same outpouring. And so thank you so much for all of your support for the Muslim community. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.